Okay.
So
Well, sure.
sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
So welcome everyone to our third installment in our Brown Bag Lecture Series, celebrating Archaeology and Historic Preservation Month here in Utah. I'm your host, Elizabeth Hora. I'm public archaeologist at the State Historic Preservation Office. And we have with us today Jacob Jepson. We're really excited to welcome him. He is our only graduate student presenting this year, so congrats, Jacob. Just a quick introduction. He is at BYU studying anthropology with an emphasis in archaeology, going out for his master's degree. He recently defended his thesis topic, which is some of what you're going to see here today. His research interests include utilizing cutting-edge remote sensing and geophysical technologies in the field of archaeology. So Jacob is currently conducting his research at Fremont sites both in Utah and in Parowan valleys, and he's implementing remote sensing techniques that until now have never been used to detect Fremont sites. And so here today, he's going to give you a little taste of his research. And just to let you know how things are going to progress today, this is a Zoom meeting, so it could be a little strange at first, but I promise once you get into it, it's very cool. He's going to give you a presentation that will, last maybe about 15 minutes. After that, it's an open question and answer period. So any questions that you have during the presentation, I ask that you please use the chat window to communicate those. After though, once he's done with his presentation, you can take yourself off mute and ask your question live to him. You can also use the chat window to pose questions that I'll then ask him. If you have other materials that you'd like to share, maybe websites, things related to topics that you want to talk about or that he's talking about, we found that chat window is actually a really dynamic way to connect all of us, and it really heightens our conversation. So without any further ado, because that was a lot of ado, please welcome Jacob Jepson to our program, and on with the show, Jacob.
Great. Thank you for that wonderful intro. I feel so honored. Let's see if I can share my screen. You guys see that? Okay. You can see that pretty well? Good deal. Okay.
Yes.
Great. Well, like Elizabeth said, my name is Jacob Jepson. I am a graduate student here at BYU, and I will be kind of discussing my research as well as the research I had done last summer. This kind of a continuation of what's happened the last couple years. So this is kind of the research we did in Goshen Valley, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But first, I want to give an overview of the people who I study, who are the Fremont and the Fremont culture. And so here. So this is the Fremont culture area map, and courtesy of Scott Ure, and this has some various site locations, but the Fremont were just a segmentary society, farming the well-watered valleys of the Eastern Great Basin, as you see there, and the plateaus and canyons of the rocky northern Colorado Plateau. And they did this, or we believe they did this around 300 to 1300 AD. And the most populated areas were located along the north-south trending Wasatch Front, which is actually the boundary of the Colorado Plateau and the Eastern Great Basin. And a lot of what we know today is the I-15 corridor. And a lot of these places where they inhabited corresponds to a lot of the places where most modern day people live today. And this map shows the primary and secondary Fremont regions. We have three primary regions in central Utah, Parowan Valley, and in Utah Valley. And the secondary regions scattered all throughout Utah. And I'm mainly focusing on what's happening here in Utah Valley. And I first want to talk about some of the artifacts that we see amongst the Fremont. And the Fremont people across this region shared styles of pottery, architecture, rock art, figurines, and of course, moccasins, which I just have in this picture. This is a picture from Harvard University of a Fremont style moccasin, typical Fremont style moccasin. And you can see they have attached dew claws on the sole of the moccasin itself, for increased traction, It's really specific to the Fremont and really cool. Another thing that's really cool in the Fremont realm, we found Fremont headdresses from feathers of the red-shafted flicker found in Mantle's Cave. These are very specific artifacts that are found, and these are more general. Throughout the Fremont region, we find ornamental items that have been imported, right, from various places. Like we have turquoise pendants from Baker Village on that top row, and then turquoise pendants from Five Finger Ridge on that bottom row. And also we have very common at Fremont sites, we find shell beads, lignite beads. These are all from Wolf Village. They've been drilled. These are pretty common that we find. We also find a lot of projectile points. These are arrowheads, as we'd say. These projectile points are of various styles and from various materials. We find projectile points that are made from obsidian, chert, chalcedony, some that are side notched, corner notched, basal notched, all that fun stuff. But what's really interesting about the Fremont is we've found over time these are called the pilling figurines, and these are a set of 11 clay figurines made by the Fremont that were discovered in 1950 by a Utah rancher and I run in Range Creek. And these figurines are believed to be 1,000 years old, and they range from 4 inches to 6 inches. They're constructed using unbaked clay and decorated with various clay ornaments. Some of them are painted, and these markings and these styles kind of give us insight onto how these ancient Fremont people dressed, how they adorned themselves. Each one is distinctive in both appearance and in gender, which is really interesting. Another way that the Fremont expressed themselves is really in rock art. And this is what the Fremont are really famous for, is their trapezoidal anthropomorphic figures. They're really interesting rock art. And this is part of what we call the Fremont PR problem. There's not a lot of standing architecture or a lot of evidence that the Fremont were here in this region besides rock art. And so this is why they're really known for it. And this is a McKee Spring rock art panel from Dinosaur National Monument. And this is another rock art panel of 9 Mile Canyon. You see the owl there. It's a really cool. The rock art's really, really awesome to look at from the Fremont. Another thing that's really prominent in the Fremont world is their pottery. A lot of gray ware is very common. However, they have 2 kinds of painted ware as we find throughout various Fremont sites. And this is a selection of Snake Valley black on gray painted bowls. And these come from the Parowan Valley in southern Utah. And then in central Utah, we have what comes up from Ivy Creek. This is black on white painted bowls. These are just a selection of those. And so now I want to talk a little bit of architecture with the Fremont. The Fremont, it's hard to really pin down architecture with the Fremont because it's so variable. I have a selection of 4 general architectural styles. And to say that there are 4 kinds is very generalizing, I understand that, but this is kind of what we see the most of. We see subterranean pit houses that are very common with the Fremont. Then we have adobe surface houses, with adobe walls and hearts in the middle. Then we have adobe room block storage structures that look more like that, as you see on there on the bottom left side. And then central structures. And this is kind of what I'll focus on a lot during my presentation as I talk more about this. But this is just an example of some of these architectural features. This is a pit house at Woodard Mound. And the thing about Fremont architecture is what we call very ephemeral, right? If anyone's dug a Fremont habitation site, you know that you can be digging 1 second and then find a floor, and then the next second it's gone. It's easy to dig through some of this stuff, and it's really difficult. And that's kind of a problem we have. But in some cases, like this is Baker Village's central structure, partially excavated on the Nevada-Utah border. But you can see there are some thick adobe walls that are easy to follow. And there's another, I think this is a storage structure back here. So really cool, easy to see there. This is an example of the variability of Fremont sites. This is a storage structure And this is a slab-lined storage structure with adobe walls. And of course, this is structure one from Wolf Village, which is a multi-room surface structure with adobe walls. And this is just one piece of it. This ended up being a multi-room, about 6 rooms in total, kind of like a grid, which was found in Wolf Village, which is just south of Wolf Mound, which I'll be talking about today. But of course, the Fremont are very notorious for their obscenely located granaries, and that some rock climbers don't even want to go to today. This is a picture of a granary in Range Creek, and this is where they stored their food to protect it from predators or other tribes, things like that. So all in all, the Fremont were, just the first semi-sedentary people here in Utah, and they were farming on the outer fringes of the greater Southwest. But what's really interesting about them, what's enigmatic, is they sort of disappear from the archaeological record. We don't really know where they went. We have some idea. There are some theories, and we vaguely know who they're related to genetically. And Fremont origins are somewhat inconclusive and really need a lot more research. And the Fremont have just been generally overshadowed by others in the greater Southwest because there's a lot more going on down in the Four Corners region. But what is really important is the habitation sites of the Fremont are really hard to find because there's really no standing architecture like we see with the ancestral Puebloan neighbors, and a lot of them are buried. And so this sort of led to our research question. We really wanted to know what the best methods were to find some of these buried sites, and sort of paint that picture. I want you to see that picture. During the 11th century, Fremont sites really just dotted the banks of the freshwater streams leading into Utah Valley. And however, over time, a lot of these sites were buried with clay deposits, river deposits, with a lake and with rivers and things like that. Or once Mormon settlers came in, they were destroyed through farming practices and things like that. So now there are some semi-visible sites found throughout Utah Valley today. However, a lot of even modern farming techniques or urban sprawl is eliminating a lot of these sites. So we wanted to find a remote sensing method that would help us to find these before they're destroyed. And so we wanted to really know if low altitude aerial thermography could be a viable alternative for identifying some of these subsurface ephemeral structures, which we tested at a mound site we later named Wolf Mound, which you see on that map is that red point on the map. And so when I say Fremont Mound, this is kind of what I'm talking about. I mean, nothing too special. I was sort of in disbelief when I first got there. You can see me just looking down at the ground, not sure if this is actually anything cultural. And that's, we went out there on July 26th, and Richard Wolf, the landowner, showed us this hayfield and this suspicious mound. And this is just about 1.5 miles south of Woodard Mound, which is another mound similar to this. And a lot of these mounds are found along what's called Current Creek. And so it seemed peculiar. It was a perfect destination. So we said, let's try it. So we decided to we decided to shave down the hay down to the surface so we could eliminate as much vegetation as possible and see the topography of the mound. And you can kind of see that better in this picture. It's starting to look more like a mound. But in retrospect, we shaved it in a circle, almost like a crop circle. And we should have just shaved it in a square, but now it's visible in Google Earth. And it probably wasn't the best idea. But nonetheless, we decided to try it. And to give you a background on what aerothermography is and how it works. Thermography is pretty much a transmission of thermal energy or heat into a visible light in order to analyze a particular object or scene. And so the way we do that is through a thermal camera. And theoretically, how it's supposed to work is you see in this figure, during the day, the sun heats up the surface of the earth, and some of these architectural features would hopefully absorb that heat and release that heat slower than the surrounding soil. Whereas pits or ditches will absorb that heat a little slower. and the soil around it would lose it fast. So it would be warmer around the actual pit, but then the architectural features will be warmer than the surrounding soil. We realized that the diurnal cycle is very critical and crucial to this. And the times to really see these architectural features would primarily be in the early morning of the day or in the late evening. So on August 29th of last year, we waited for a really hot day. It was about 100 degrees the day before. And we decided to go out at 5:15 a.m. with our drone. And FAA regulations limit us to flying at night unless we have strobe lights on it, and we have visual observers. And so we decided to fly it with our thermal camera. And this is sort of a video of us flying in the middle of the night, and you can see those bright strobe lights. And it's really cool because you have these big lights. It looks like a spaceship with crop circles. It's just like a scene out of it's like cool. Really fun. Yeah, and that is it. And from that flight, we were able to capture this image. So pay no attention to that circle. That's a vegetation mark. That's from where we had cut the grass. And we want to pay attention to what's inside of the actual image. And so you can kind of, if you squint hard enough, you can see that there's some, you can see there's something linear going on there, and this is an annotated version. So we were kind of seeing were possibly two superimposed structures kind of crossing over, kind of a mess there. But we wanted to make sure this wasn't a fluke, that we weren't just seeing things in the grass. So we decided to use GPR, which is a form of remote sensing, the geophysical technique called ground penetrating radar. And that's not it, that's a lawnmower. We wanted to make sure we got rid of that circle, and we mowed it in a square this time. So we prepped it for GPR survey, and with the help of John McBride from the BYU geology department, we were able to use his instrument to see what's under the surface. And that's the landowner, and Scott, you're there, and with John McBride on the machine. And how ground penetrating radar works is it's a geophysical method that uses radar pulses to just image the subsurface. And if the soil's good enough, it can reach down to about 3 meters with this antenna. And then with the lower gradient, with the lower antennas, you can penetrate up to like 3 miles, right? But since everything we're looking for is really shallow, we wanted a higher antenna. So from this survey, we were able to collect some images, and using a Radan software, it interpolates that data and creates a map. And from this map, you see this is a depth of 0.05 feet. So this is right near the surface. And I've kind of shown the crosshairs there of an anomaly right in the middle of the screen. And there's what we thought maybe could be a hearth. And then the furthest we could actually penetrate was only a foot. And which was a problem because that we should be seeing up to 3 meters down. So we could still see that anomaly, but however, it was somewhat inconclusive because we couldn't penetrate over a foot. We lost our GPS signal. Our total station was down, so it wasn't looking too good, and the results are somewhat inconclusive. However, it gave us enough evidence to really move forward. And based upon these two methods, we decided to excavate. And so on the beginning of October, we began our excavation. We started with a north-south trench, and we dug down about 1 meter with the help with undergraduates and graduate students. And over that time, we were able to find this was an adobe wall on the south side of our trench. So you can see there. And this is a picture of it looking south. So you can see that at the end of the picture. And we came down on a prepared surface. You can see there are some post holes on that surface. And we were able to find a south wall and a western wall. It's another video, picture of our trench looking north. And that's just our drone picture looking down with our mowing job. This is a plan view map of our actual excavation. So you see that we found a western wall, a southern wall, and post holes with some shin stones. And that circle in the middle here was a depression on top of the mound, and this is the actual mound edge itself. So you can see the walls sort of lined up with the outside of the mound, which is really interesting. So this kind of was intriguing to us. We couldn't figure out what the structure was, and it was so deep, and somehow aerial thermography saw that. It left us with a lot of questions. And then when we were excavating, we noticed here in this top profile, what we believe to be a second structure. It may be a potential pit structure, because we think this is a hearth right here, and it actually corresponds to this depression, which is really interesting. So we saw we were able to find two superimposed structures, and what we think the structure might be, that bottom structure, we think it could be a central structure. This is based upon our aerial thermography, where those two walls were located, as well as the lack of artifacts on the floor. We believe it may have been ceremonially cleaned before it was abandoned and filled. So overall, the aerial thermography really proved to be effective in this situation, and it led us to really perform further testing. It wasn't perfect, and there were a lot of variables surrounding it. We're still trying to work out the kinks, and we're doing some other experiments for some other publications we're working on. So we're still in the process, but some of the artifacts we did find from our excavation were, we did find some Snake Valley black on gray pottery from Parowan Valley, some Ivy Creek black on white from central Utah, a shell bead, some projectile points, some really interesting bifaces, and then a Aryadactyl incised worked bone with some carving on the end. And we just assumed this was an awl, but apparently at Five Finger Ridge they found a similar one, and we believed it was a hairpin. So it could be a hairpin, which is really interesting. Another thing we were able to find was a single maize kernel that we were able to date with the help of Jim Allison from BYU. The kernel actually dated to 989 to 1052 AD. So right in that Fremont time period, puts it right around the same time as in between Wolf Village and Woodard Mound. And therefore, we're pretty confident that this was a Fremont structure. As to exactly what it is, we're not entirely sure. We need to excavate a little further, follow that south wall, and determine actually what it is. And so the question is, now what? Well, there's still a lot more we need to excavate on that mound. There are also some potential anomalies elsewhere on this property. If you do a false color analysis of the Google Earth imagery, you see there's a strange subrectangular feature there, similar to structure 1 at Wolf Village, who knows, but if we do multiple false colors, it still shows up. So this leads me into my research. So for my master's thesis, I plan to use a magnetic radiometer, which is like a magnetometer, which is another form of geophysics, and it uses the Earth's magnetic field to measure anomalies beneath the surface. And we plan to do around 100 square meter survey in this field, and also another survey at Wolf Village, to determine other areas of interest, define anomalies, and then based upon those anomalies, we'll probably try GPR again on those anomalies, since it's a little slower to acquire that data. Magnetometry can go pretty fast. So once we establish which anomalies look promising, we'll possibly ground truth them, see what's there. And then possibly, if COVID is still prominent and allowing us to not travel, we may not be able to excavate this summer at Wolf Mound, but we're crossing our fingers because we really want to go. We're itching to go and find more information about this mound. And so yeah, that's the future plan. With my research, we'll be implementing a lot more geophysical techniques, and we'll probably go out there and use more aerial thermography and try a lot of these high-tech stuff, because we got to. It's a lot of fun. So all in all, I just want to give a special thanks and shout out to Richard Wolf, the landowner, for letting us go around and poke and prod his land and see what's under there. He's really awesome about letting us do that. Scott Ure, so I thank him for letting me go out there with him and dig and be part of this and teaching me all that he knows. Richard helping out as well, and Dr. Searcy, my committee chair, for a lot of these ideas and being really positive and optimistic about my project, and BYU, of course, and the Museum of Peoples and Cultures. And I also just want to say thank you to everyone for joining me today and letting me talk your ear off about local Fremont archaeology and some of the cool stuff we're doing here. So thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you. That's awesome. I have a few questions to start off. This is the Q&A period, so anyone else who has questions, please jump in or use the chat window. But while those thoughts are ruminating, I was wondering, Jacob, if this is something that would allow you to, at a large scale, check out other farmed parcels that are out there, because we still have a lot of land around Utah Valley that has never really been investigated, and we suspect that there are more Fremont homes, villages under these areas. Is it something that, maybe after an alfalfa harvest, you could do some particular magic, either using Google Images, a false image search, or on the ground work? Is that something that you could scale up production of, I guess?
I definitely think that's a possibility, and it should be, honestly. I mean, there's a lot of expansion that's going on in Utah Valley, and I think enough research is being done before that's being pushed out, really. And these are really simple ways. I mean, obviously Google Earth is the easiest way to really go about trying to see if you can find things, but to the trained eye, it's really easy to find some of these potential Fremont habitation areas. And it does take a while to figure out, which is which. You can't just say, well, this mound here is what they should all look like, and then kind of go off of that, because Fremont sites are so variable. And, from how this lake floods and dries up and how the regions flood over time, it really makes a big difference to each area. So, but by using all these methods, a multi-method approach, as a lot of what they do in the Southeast, you can really, if one method doesn't work, then you try the other, and you combine them, you overlap them, and it really hones in on what could potentially be there. And that's, I think, is something that's never really been done here in this region. And I think it could be really beneficial to finding these sites. And I mean, there's a lot that, just until, last decade, Wolf Village is a very large village that was just found the last decade. There's a lot we still need to learn. There's a lot to know.
Yeah, there is a ton. Just looking across the valley, it's a lot of area. We have a question on the chat from Troy Scotter. Troy asks, my understanding is that in Egypt, they're using infrared satellite imagery for subsurface archaeology. Is that not plausible here because the soil is more dense and retains heat more?
That's a good point. Infrared, with a lot of the infrared stuff, a lot of times they're using satellites to measure the near infrared scale and of the part of the spectrum, which could work out here, because depending on some of this vegetation, whether obviously you can see in this image, even the vegetation is a little different, right? So near infrared could definitely be applicable here, and in some cases, thermography uses a portion of the near infrared spectrum inside of thermography. So it could all be easily used. It's just how you acquire the platform, right? To access those satellites can be very expensive, or to access platforms to use near infrared can be expensive, or LiDAR, right? We know it can be pretty expensive, and since I'm on a graduate student budget, it's a little harder, but who knows? In the future, I think that'd be a good alternative for sure.
Yeah, the toys that you're playing with are not cheap themselves, right? So
no.
how could we export this to maybe like a CRM environment, or could we? Is it actually just cheaper to have folks dig holes in the ground?
In cases, I think that well, it depends on how many is on your survey or it's on your crew, obviously. But there's been a big push to implement a lot of these new geophysical technologies into the CRM world, right? So it's an initial investment right off the bat. Like we see a lot of, if I go back here on this slide, a lot more CRM companies are actually using this kind of magnetometer because they call it the workhorse of geophysics, because I mean you can cover up to 8 hectares, I think, in a day, a work day. So it's 8 acres anyway. You can cover a lot of ground, really, and it's really light and easy to use, and it's a lot of all the other geophysical equipment. It's the cheapest, so it's the most accessible. It's cheap, and you really need 2 or 3 people to run it. So, and it really can give you an idea of where you want to dig first. So in my mind, I'm just like, yes, this is a no-brainer. But just depending on the soil that you have, depending on whether or not there's a lot of metal around, makes a big difference. So there's a lot of things to consider. But if you're in a region where it's flat, where it's clear, there's you have a lot of area to cover, this is by far the way to go, for sure. Okay. And there's only a few places in Utah you can really do this. You know, there's a lot of bushes, boulders, trees, really rugged terrain in Utah, so it makes it a little difficult. But.
Definitely. We've got a couple more chat questions. Spencer Harris says, I'm a resident of Utah Valley, and I'm interested in learning more about the ancient history of the valley. What resources can I use, and what sites are publicly available? And I can help you answer that too, but why don't you take a crack at it?
Oh, thanks. Well, there are great resources online, with obviously with the SHPO office, with the BLM, any of the federal agencies that have access to this knowledge, you can get that. There are also a lot of publications. There's Utah Professional Archaeological Conference articles. There are a lot of Utah articles talking about Utah archaeology specifically. Society for American Archaeology. A lot of this stuff is available online, which is awesome about this day and age. It's amazing what you can access online today. And I would say that would be a good place to turn to. I don't know, Elizabeth, what would you say?
Yeah, I'm actually going to the internet now to pull up the Utah Archaeology Journal that's published every year. We're a couple years behind, but we're catching up. That link is in the chat. It's just called Utah Archaeology Journal. You can find it with a Google search. And if you want the newest issues, you can become a member of the Utah Professional Archaeological Council or the Utah Statewide Archaeological Society. Memberships in either organization will comp you the latest and greatest yearly issue of Utah Archaeology. And pretty frequently we do feature things in Utah Valley because that's where a lot of us live and work. So it's just a convenient research lab for us.
Yeah.
You want to get out and about and see some things that are in Utah Valley, we actually have some rock imagery sites that are available to visit. So one of them, let me get another website going, is the Smith Family Archaeological Preserve.
Yeah, that one's pretty new too.
It's fairly new, yeah. It's been there for a few years. It is owned by the Archaeological Conservancy. Yeah. Here it is, the Adelbert Doyle, on and on, Smith Family Archaeological. I'll get you that. So that link is in the chat too. Tours right now have been canceled due to COVID-19, but keep a lookout because in the fall, they may open it up for tours again. They do take a hiatus over the summer because it is very hot and more than a little bit buggy. But they have, I want to say, over 200 rock imagery panels. A lot of them date to the Archaic period and the Fremont period. And like Jacob was saying, you can tell the ones that are Fremont because they often have those human figures with elaborate headdresses on. And some of them look a lot like that flicker feather headdress that Jacob showed. So that's available. And then BLM lands actually have two areas, Lake Mountain and West Mountain. Lake Mountain is open for hiking. You can find some instructions to get there online. The BLM doesn't really disclose that information, but it's very easy to find out where the rock imagery is. You can actually, I believe, find a link on our Facebook page, Utah SHPO. Let me get that going for you. Well, I'll get that in a minute. West Mountain, sort of in the Wolf Village neck of the woods, is near Benjamin, Utah. It is currently a shooting range, so be cautious, be careful if you do go down there. But it's BLM land, so it's open to the public, so you can wander around and take a look at the rock imagery down there. It's a long-winded answer I had. Sorry.
No, that's great. You're the one to answer. That was a good one.
I know a couple places. But Cynthia has another question for you, Jacob. So you mentioned that temperature could maximize the accuracy of readings. Does soil moisture change the readings as well? For example, ground penetrating radar is enhanced in the Southwest when the soil is moist, which enhances its electrical conductivity.
Yeah, so ground moisture plays a big deal when it comes to thermography, right? Because it'll cool that soil and keep it very well saturated. So we really want it, the best time what we figured out is obviously when it's in the heat of the summer, when it's really hot. Some of our best results have been in August and July. We've tested in March and April after some spring rains. And there is some of that cool air does get trapped, which is really interesting. And anything that's been dug or anything, a pit or anything like that, we noticed a lot of the cooler temperatures sink and stay in there. And then while the sun kind of dried up the surrounding soil, you can see that. So it's helpful and not helpful at the same time. There's a lot of variables with aerial thermography that we're really trying to work out. But it's not being studied very widely in the realm of archaeology. There's probably like one or two other people that are doing it currently. So there's a lot to learn.
Wondering actually about the water table, because we do have sites around the Provo airport.
Yeah.
It's in an area that floods from time to time, so the water table's really high there. Is that a good place or a terrible place to implement something like this?
From our experience, it seems that the more drier the condition, right? Like dry with masonry, and it's gold. That is perfect. Or anything that with if we have Provo mounds where it's the water table's about 1 meter down and you have just thick clays, it makes it really difficult to see things like that. So just like with any remote sensing or geophysical techniques, understanding the soil morphology is really critical before you start doing these things. So it's important to auger, to do some push auger testing before you actually go out there. So, which does that happen often? No, we usually just get too excited and then we just fly the drone out and see if it works. But
so where would be an ideal spot out of the places that you've visited? We don't want something rocky or bushy, right? We don't want something that's swamped. So where would be a great place?
Good question. What's worked really well in the past, in New Mexico, there was a site called the Blue Jay site, which worked really well. And we've been out, Jim Allison works at a site called Alkali Ridge, down by Bluff and Blanding. And that site is covered with junipers. But if we were to clear away that vegetation, you have about 6 inches or so of soil underneath some of these architectural features. So if you have a thin layer of soil above masonry or adobe, anything like that, that is ideal. It's incredible because that stuff just shows that it just locks in heat really well, because when you're that far south, that sun just bakes those features. So in the southeast, if Utah, it should work really well. But since nothing's really been tested in Utah Valley, we figured why not try it, And so far we haven't been disappointed. It's been it's worked pretty well. So we need to try it on a couple more sites. So there's a lot to learn, a lot to see.
Yeah, even just from those few trenches, that was a pretty amazing discovery that you guys found. I guess my other question is, you guys had the maize cob that dated to the late 900s, right?
Yeah.
Did you think like the two pit houses overlapping, or was it just the single one? Because your first hypothesis, right, was those two sub-rectangular houses.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, once we did our analysis, once we actually excavated, it kind of changed, right?
Okay.
We had this.
About the second date, but there is no second date.
Yeah, there's no second date, unfortunately. That's one thing we want to do, is maybe, we would like to further excavate this section too, and the profile of that superimposed possible pit structure. See if we can find a date, because that would be interesting. But the interesting thing is, this pit structure and this, what we think it might be a central structure, those lines don't really add up to our original thermal image. Right? So is it just smoke and mirrors? That's kind of our question. So we're like, but we saw something. But then we did further research, and there is something, it's called thermal drift, right? So when something gets heated up, and as it cools and it escapes the surface, it kind of like distorts a little bit. So that's something we realized after, and we're like, well, how do we account for that? So that's something we're working with we have a test plot with various architectural features buried up to like a meter down. And we like with controlled soil, and we test it every month. So that's something we're working on figuring out, because no one's really mentioned, or no one's really tried to tackle how to mitigate that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, what are the odds then, do you think, that just any hole of sufficient size on Mr. Wolf's property is going to find you a pit house village? Like, is this place just hopping in prehistory?
Yeah, I tell people all the time, I'm just like a broken record. Whenever I'm out hiking, I'm telling my family, I'm like, just imagine this valley with just all these pit houses, all these homes, like smoke coming out. I mean, this was the place to be.
Yeah.
We know even when Escalante and Dominguez came up, and all the Tobago's people were out chilling on the lake, fishing every day, that was a big source of food for them. So it would have been the same way anciently. And this was a trading hub. People were coming up through here. They were fishing on this beautiful lake, these beautiful rivers. So I think, and there was a lot of tributaries that led to this lake before we dammed them all and, put them into the lake. So, wherever there's a tributary, wherever there was access to water, you could throw a rock and you could probably find some form of Fremont architecture, I would say.
So maybe you need an area with fewer villages, with fewer houses, because
yeah, and some people were lucky enough to have land there and to be able to find all that stuff. So whenever we're out there, people stop by and say, hey, I find projectile points on my land all the time. You want to come out and see what's going on? So and the thing is, a lot of people just don't know where to look, or they don't know, they don't know the history. So
yeah. Do you have other landowners that are interested in working with BYU to do more of this kind of excavation, or what do you tell people when they come up?
We tell them, I think a lot of people are worried when we're out there excavating, or if they find anything that's archaeological on their land, they think, oh, the government's going to come in and make this a national park, and they're going to take away my land. But that never happens. And that's what we've been trying to tell people. And working with Wolves has been awesome. It started with Joel Janetsky. He told them, like, listen, we're just going to test things. We're going to display them for you. We're going to show you what you have. We'll do 3D models, and you will house all the artifacts in our museum for you. And then if you want to keep some of them, you can, because it's your land. And so that's private land. That's what we do with private land. So And that's what we've told people that have come on the land as we've given tours. And, I think there's a lot of negative connotations when it comes to archaeology and private land. And I think we've slowly kind of broken down those barriers. And that's a hope, right? Because we want more people to understand that we want to preserve the archaeology that is on their land, because we don't know a lot about the Fremont and we need to know more. And I think a lot of these sites are under people's noses, and we need private landowners to help us with that. So
Yeah, that's really great. I actually was thinking something about, well, what do you do if you were to find human remains, right? Because all of these people did go somewhere, and all of these people lived and probably died fairly close to their homes. And so would
yeah.
penetrating radar be able to identify a burial in opposition to, well, any of these methods, not just ground penetrating radar, right? Would any of these remote sensing methods be able to identify a burial, and would you be able to identify it with enough accuracy that you felt comfortable saying this is a burial, we will not excavate this area? Or how would that play out, do you think?
That's a great question. When it comes to accuracy with any geophysical method, I'm never one to say I truly know that that's something, right?
Yeah.
I usually say, that's a common phrase in archaeology, like, it could be something, right? That's our number one quoted thing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we roll with. With GPR, that's kind of a common question people ask with GPRs: can you see burials? Because they've done that with TV, like, oh, we found this murdered person because of GPR. When in all reality, you can't see the body, but you could see the pit that it was buried in, or the displaced soil, right? Because it'll be the soil will be lighter. It'll be it'll look different than the surrounding soil. And with magnetometry and GPR, you could pick that up depending on the soil. So the question would be, you can't really go unknowing it's a burial, but if in the past there have been some found with GPR that look a certain way, you can base that off of it, obviously. And that's been done. I think that was done in the Middle East. They used GPR to find some burials, and they were able to actually map them all in 3D, which is really cool. So it's possible.
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually had never heard that. Mary Wright in the chat has a question.
Yeah.
I have a larger question about the name given to these peoples. What is the current thinking on that in archaeological circles? Yeah, the name Fremont, it's loaded, right?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Noel Morse was, I think, the first one to name the Fremont culture based upon his survey of the Fremont River, and then his name, that was named after a, I think, fur trapper, wasn't it? Or a
Fremont.
mountain man.
Yep.
Yeah. I haven't heard, I think there's a lot of, obviously arguments about naming people, but I think with the Fremont, we've kind of just settled. We've been pretty okay with it, because there really aren't very many, we don't have modern tribes today that really own up to the Fremont being their ancestors, and they're not really as focused on the name per se as we are with, like, the ancestral Puebloans who were originally, who we named Anasazi, and that were, later we referred to the ancestral Puebloans. So I don't know, I haven't really heard any, maybe you have, Elizabeth, I haven't really heard anybody really speaking up about the Fremont name.
No, I haven't either. And I think that in part that's because the comparison to the ancestral Puebloan is great. The ancestral Puebloans, we didn't consider them, we named them Anasazi, and we said this is that culture. With Fremont, there's so much variability across space and across time that from the get-go, Noel Morris and then everyone past him were like, yeah, we're calling this Fremont, and it's kind of squishy. The boundary is pretty squishy. This is in the 80s, they started terming it, in the 90s, a behavioral complex, right? Fremont is the name of the way of life that we're giving to these people in this archaeological context.
And that's,
know of any, oh, go ahead, sorry.
And that's kind of what we do as archaeologists. Like we compartmentalize, we categorize, and sometimes the only way to do that is just to give them a name and just kind of say, and we just usually just state what we're saying or what we mean before we say Fremont. Like, this is just what we label these people. This isn't what they're called. This isn't their culture, but this is just how we make sense of them. As people, we have to compartmentalize, we have to categorize in order to really subconsciously absorb things, I think.
Yeah, I agree. So Mary, if you know of anything, or if you have a suggestion for something else, I think we're, as a community, fairly receptive to it.
Yeah, let's rename the Fremont. If you got a good name, we can.
You got to with better specificity, something with more cultural sensitivity.
Yeah.
Because John C. Fremont is not known for even being a cool or kind person. So
no.
we're taking applications for name changes.
Good question, though.
Yeah. Just a personal question. What do you think you will do with this after? Oh, sorry. We've got Troy says he's a cool and kind person. I think he's putting his name in the ring. And then Mary followed up that she said she thought she heard something about Anasazi State Park renaming. So Jacob, do you want to take that? Like, why might Anasazi State Park be renamed?
Because Anasazi is a Navajo word for the ancient ones, right? It's kind of an antiquated name, antiquated term. So either probably just trying to keep up with the times. And archaeologically, we don't really use the term Anasazi anymore. We use Virgin Anasazi in the Southwest, but it's a little different. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that I've heard a professional archaeologist say Anasazi since probably about 2000. We've all really switched over to ancestral Puebloan. So Fremont, I don't know. Fremont, I think we're still powering through with that name, unless we rename them the Troy Scotter peoples. Oh, so Mary, you're saying they're talking about renaming Fremont Indian State Park? I haven't heard that. And that's interesting to follow up on. I can find out more information.
Yeah, I would like to know. I was actually wanting to go to Fremont Indian State Park, so here pretty soon.
Yeah, it's actually open right now. Fremont Indian State Park, open and ready for you to go visit. So yeah, Mary, I'm not sure about renaming the Fremont Culture, the Fremont Indian State Park. I'm just not sure, but we can find out for you if that's something of interest. But then, yeah, so just kind of to wrap up, we've only got a few more minutes. Jacob, how do you think you will apply this outside of the academic realm? Do you think you'll ever get to apply it?
I hope so. I'm one who am a big advocate of making the gray literature, like the really what's the word I'm looking for? Really tight-knit academic information more public. I grew up in St. George and I really liked archaeology and I wanted a lot of access to it. And I was amazed at how much work had been done in my neck of the woods that I knew nothing about, because it was kind of locked in these, just kind of put on the shelves in academia. So I've been wanting to make it my goal to really get my research out there and kind of tell people what's going on, even in the local region. That's kind of my life goal. I hope I do it better than now, but that's kind of the hope. I think when we'll eventually publish this research. We were going to go to Oxford to present some of this information, and we were going to publish it there, and then publish it in Utah Archaeology as well. So
great.
We wanted to get more information from this mound before we did that. So it'll probably be another year or so before we start moving forward with that. But yeah.
Yeah, good scholarship takes time.
And once I finish my thesis, I'll make it accessible so you guys can. Anybody who's crazy enough to read really technical writing can read it.
Awesome. Yeah, and we hope that you'll have more presentations like this that are open and accessible to the public. You're a great speaker.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, I think we're probably going to close that for the day. Thank you so much. Oh, and Troy Scotter says, thanks for the Utah archaeology link. He's downloaded all of it. And I realized he sent it to me privately, but Troy, now everyone knows. Free, it's available for free to download. So really go and download all of the Utah archaeologies. They're great fun reading. They're fairly technical, but we do try to make them accessible too.
Yeah, and there was one just published on Wolf Village in the newest one, so you check it out.
Yep, that one, you do have to be a member of the Utah Statewide Archaeological Society or Utah Professional Archaeological Council to get that in your hot little hands as a paper copy. But we can definitely, we would love to have more members. We're always taking more people in. So thank you so much, Jacob. That was a really fantastic presentation, fascinating research, and wish you all the best in your graduate studies.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming and being part of it. I appreciate it a lot.
Definitely. Thank you all. We have one more Zoom meeting scheduled for next week for our Brown Bag Lecture Series. That will be on the Oljedo Trading Post. It is more of a historic preservation-minded talk, but the Oljedo Trading Post has a really rich and incredible history down there on the Navajo Nation. So check it out. And thanks so much, everyone, for joining with us. See you next week.